Hello, my name's Andrew Hunter. I'm part of Kazarikai USA. We're an organization here in America dedicated to preserving traditional Japanese woodworking. I'm really happy for this opportunity to share one of my favorite subjects, Japanese hand planes. Japanese hand planes have shaped my work both literally and figuratively for the past 20 years. I wasn't always using Japanese tools when I first started out woodworking. This was my first plane. And as a Western trained woodworker, I used it to flatten boards, square them, but I was still using sandpaper to bring the surface to a lustery finish. That was until I attended my first Kazarikai event in 2001. It was a mind-blowing experience to see Japanese carpenters using these tools to finish wood that needed no other treatment. It was a sensory overload to feel the surface and to see the shine of the light bouncing off it, and to smell. It was what woodworking felt like it should be to me, an experience that I have with the wood and with the trees. So returning from this event, a week later, I bought my first Japanese hand plane, and I have bought many since. So I'll show you the rest of my tools. So in my everyday woodworking, these are sort of my go-to planes. Here's the first one I start with. You know, when a board is rough, straight from the sawmill, I'll go at it with this plane. This is just a rough plane, not necessarily tuned up as fine as the other planes, but honestly does most of the work in my shop. I love this plane. Next plane along the way, when things are starting to come into shape, you know, a board is getting flattened and squared. Most of that grunt work is done here, but as it starts to come into shape, this is a jointer plane. Its longer body will help reference the board and bring it into flat as I pull strokes across it. So once my boards are flat, square and straight, then I can lay out joinery and cut joinery, and then you know, when everything goes together, the final thing is to go over every surface with a finish plane. I use generally two finish planes. This is one for softer woods, and this is one for harder woods. Actually, this is that first plane that I bought after going to that Kazarikai event 20 years ago. So this I use for harder woods. It's actually the blade is bedded at a little bit steeper angle, which makes it more suited for harder, more difficult woods. So other than the smoothing planes, I have specialty planes. These two planes here are favorites. These are rabbet planes, meaning that the blade comes right to the edge. And I use these planes in my joinery a lot. You know, say a mortise and tenon, I can use a plane like this to shave right into the cheek, right into the shoulder of the tenon, which is where my accuracy comes from. You know, I can use a handsaw to cut close to a line, but it is a hand plane that allows me to, you know, shave right up to the line at increments of, you know, the thickness of a shaving, next to nothing. You know, from there I have other specialty planes. This is a plane for cutting grooves, and you know, once you cut that groove, well, you're going to need to clean the sides of the groove. So I have two planes for either side of cleaning grooves. Let's see. This is a nice plane. This is a dovetail plane. You can see it has just the angle of a sliding dovetail that I use in my work. So I can cut or at least adjust a sliding dovetail with this. Same with, this is a groove plane. It uses a fence to reference off the edge of a board and puts a groove into a board. This one's a 1/4 inch. It has two additional cutters to cut the grain if you're working across the grain. Let's see, so there's round and scoot bellied and all sorts of curved shaped planes for working different shapes. You know, this is a traditional spoke shave that we would recognize. This is let me show you this one. This is what I use to maintain and flatten the bottoms of my other planes. I don't generally use it on my furniture, but rather it's used to condition the soles of my planes and keep them in shape. I won't get into just what shape. They're not quite flat in a Japanese plane. I'll discuss that later. So, you know, some planes, you know, I use these to work every day. You know, but they are more honestly than just a woodworking tool. This is a plane which is a work of art as well as a woodworking tool. And you know, what that means is it inspires my work. I try harder when I use this plane because it is so beautiful. The Japanese plane is essentially made of three parts: the wooden body or die, the chip breaker, and the main cutting blade itself. Japanese blacksmiths are world famous for their samurai swords. That same skill and technology are in these plane blades. They're a laminated construction with a thin hard piece of steel on the bottom, laminated to a thicker, softer iron on top. The advantage of having a hard steel is that it will take a fine edge and hold that edge longer. The disadvantage is harder steel is more brittle. That's where the quality of the soft iron comes in and can dampen the vibration and allows that hard steel to be extra hard without chipping. You'll see the blade itself is tapered and fits into a tapered slot in the block. The chip breaker is held by this pin. The body of a Japanese plane is unique. The sole itself is not perfectly flat. Rather, it's only touching the wood just before the cutting edge and in the leading edge. This greatly increases the efficiency of the plane. I'd like to take a closer look now at Japanese hand planes, or kana, and share with you some of the unique characteristics that make them so special. I have here three planes. I have my Japanese plane as well as two Western planes. A plane like this you may have seen before, or even inherited from a grandparent. It has a metal body, wooden handles, and a knob to adjust the depth of cut. This Western plane was actually made right here in New York about 150 years ago and shares many of the qualities of a handmade Japanese plane. It has a wooden body as well as a forged blade. So in use, really the main difference that you'll notice right away is that a Western plane is pushed to cut, whereas a Japanese plane cuts on the pull stroke. And this actually wasn't always the case. The Japanese plane is a relatively new tool to the Japanese toolbox, and it came to Japan from China in the 1600s. Chinese craftsmen were using a very similar design plane, but on the push stroke. So when this plane came to Japan in the 1600s, they were using this tool, which is yarigana, or a spear plane, to smooth their timbers. And this tool is used in a seated position on the pull stroke. So it was natural for those craftsmen to adapt the new push plane from China into a pull plane, and it's been used that way ever since. So one of the other differences that you're going to notice right away about these two planes is the blade itself. I'll take this apart for you and show you. This blade, as well as the rest of the plane, is a product of mass production. whereas the Japanese blade is made one blade at a time by a highly skilled craftsman, and you can really see the difference. Learning how to use a hand plane is an essential skill. Whether you're using a Japanese plane or a Western, your project will no longer be dictated by the limitations of your machines, because there's always going to be a board wider than your power planer. With a hand plane, I can flatten any size board. In fact, it doesn't need to be flat at all. There is no limit to the shape I can create with a hand plane. So let me demonstrate flattening this beautiful 18-inch wide walnut board, which, by the way, doesn't fit through my power planer. I'm going to use my 3 planes, my rough, my jointer, and I'm going to finish with my smoothing plane. So the grain of this board is running in this direction. The majority of the flattening process, like I said, will be done with my rough plane. I'm going to be working perpendicular to the grain. Not only is it easier to sever wood fibers in this direction, but I also don't need to be as concerned about causing blowout, which is where wood fibers tear instead of being cut. So the majority of the flattening process is done in this way, 90 degrees to the grain. As I work, I'm going to come to 60 degrees and 45 degrees to the grain though. And to do this, I'm going to want to switch to my more refined jointer plane. Not only is my jointer plane tuned to a greater degree than my rough plane, meaning I spent more time sharpening the blade, it's got a chip breaker, and it's designed to take a thinner, less aggressive shaving. It also has a different sole profiling. It has 3 contact points instead of just the 2 that my rough plane had. This has an additional contact point behind the blade. What this does is references the high and low spots of the board to further refine the flatness. I also use my jointer plane to flatten and square the edges of my board. To do this, I elevate the board just off my bench an inch or so, and then I reference or glide along the edge of my plane so that I can put a square surface on the board. So at this point in the flattening process, this board is ready for final planing. This is my finished plane, and it is tuned up to the highest degree because I'm going to be taking all my shavings parallel to the grain, where the risk of tear out is highest. I want to say a word about the pull stroke itself. It doesn't rely on my arms so much as it does the larger, stronger muscles of my core and legs. In this way, the movement is more of a martial art based, where I have more control the closer I am to my center. So I hope you're inspired to try out a Japanese plane yourself, and we'll see you at the next Kazarikai event. Kazarikai literally translates as planing group. It was first established in Japan as a way to preserve their traditional craft and to educate a new generation of craftspeople. Kazarikai USA was formed more recently to share in this knowledge. Each year, carpenters gather together at these Kazarikai events to share and to inspire one another. One of the highlights of these events is the planing contest, where carpenters compete to take the thinnest, most perfect shaving with their hand planes. Really, the meaning of Kazarikai can be seen in a shaving. It tells the story of the craftsperson's skill, the love of their plane to tune it. It tells of the blacksmith's skill to forge the blade. It even speaks of the tree itself. All this is in a single shaving. In 2016, a group of Kazarikai Japan members came to an event here in the United States. The generosity of these craftsmen is amazing. Not only did they fly halfway across the world to inspire Americans, but on their departure, some of them even left behind their beloved tools. This is one of those tools. It is a plane designed to put a finished surface on a 12-inch wide beam in a single pass, and it is truly a treasure to this world. Fumiyoshi Yamamoto left this with the Kazarikai USA in the hopes that it will inspire us to devote ourselves to this craft, to see that it grows. As important as this plane is to Americans, I think Yamamoto-san would agree that this plane is even more important. It was made here in Connecticut by Jim Blauvelt. He is an American blacksmith making Japanese plane blades. Japanese planes have the ability to awaken America's past, a past where there was more of an intimacy with the tools, with the work, and with the trees themselves.